Digital Literacy Narrative, Collaboration in the Online Space by Robert Finch. In our children, we establish a firm rule at a young age: don't talk to strangers. Even when these children are well into their teen years, we say the same thing when applying to online interactions. I remember when my parents monitored my online friends with zeal. To this day, if someone I meet online comes from a faraway place, that person is not allowed in any of our homes, and we have to meet in a neutral space. Such is their cultural fear of online interactions, a habit instilled in those who were not born with the net and web identities. As a digital native, I can attest, I would not nearly be as accomplished or successful without the internet. I have 3 short stories published in literary magazines, and 2 comics en route to being published. And how have I become successful? Simply networking. The internet is, of course, vast. There are multiple readily available text to read, and of course, we can communicate with people we already know through messaging services like Yahoo Instant Messenger and Skype. But there are many people online that gather together who may never have met online. Or offline. These people form groups connected by interests involving media like books and hobbies like model train collecting, and in real life could be separated by miles or even continents. It's a meeting of international minds that happens every day, and like any group or meeting, there's regular communities and connections that form. But what happens when that form is specifically targeted towards networking? The year is the summer 2008, and I have just graduated high school. I had summer free for the most part to partake of whatever I desire, and being sort of a shut-in, I was quite happy with the concept of exploring the world from the comfort of my own home. My feelers stretched towards hobbies at first: video games, online literature, and what I'm particularly enamored of at that time in this summer of 2008 is webcomics, graphic literature presented by amateur creators that are available online for all to see. As a writer myself connected to years and worlds of literature, it seemed a natural step to do what these strangers are doing, finding success and making comics for popularity. And of course, being a shy child with little social success, the idea of popularity for a little work appealed to me. But what is the final step? What is the first step? What I don't take into account is that most webcomic creators at the time, and still today, were one man or woman affairs, with the creator doing both writing and drawing. Though I won't assume that proficiency in communication skills is a factor, I can very easily assume that for a group of even 2 to work, it requires tremendous organization and compromises on both parts. I will go more into the particulars later, but the point is being that I had no idea what I was getting to when I went to onlinecomics.net and made a post likely labeled "Writer Looking for Artist." By 18, I developed the following very useful skills. I was a proficient typist and could type quickly and with little effort, though not always accurately. I also knew how to use the internet well, particularly how to use Google to find a website forum catering to the meeting of artists and writers together into a working team. I consider myself having gotten my big break when an Australian artist contacted me stating that she was interested in doing an issue-length comic based on an idea I had proposed. Before long, I was hard at work composing my first comic, Into the Dark, without, of course, any researching what a comic script looks like. I wrote my comic strips then, panel by panel, no direction as to what pages the panels would be on, which is contrary to like the 6-panel standard you see in a lot of comic books. Just as I finally finished the comic, I got an email from a roommate saying that she had become an undercover cop, which she mentioned before, and had not been in the apartment for several weeks. This was my first out of multiple failed attempts to launch a comic due to my inexperience. The problem that was first and foremost was my understanding of the burden of the artist in drawing the comic. I didn't get it. I was not aware at 18 that drawing comic was in fact more laborious and involving than writing comic, taking more time and more effort per page. Thus, in a relationship with an artist, I as a scripter had to provide motivation. One way is money, but even lacking that, there were many things I could do then, namely keep in communication. The young Australian woman had responded to my initial email and then to another one showing samples of her work. After these two emails, I had no word from her, not even realizing this till around a month later. I didn't understand then that I did not understand then that it was a very good idea to, at least to start, to communicate with the artist once a week, and if the artist does not respond for 2 weeks in a row, make plans to work on something else. The dropout rate, especially sudden dropout rates without warning, are common among collaborators on the internet. What I did not understand then was that part of my job as project lead was to keep the artist's interest involved in the project, something I learned a little of in the next project purely by accident. While finishing up the script for Into the Dark, I stumbled upon an ad on onlinecomics.net, searching for a writer capable of editing text for a comic that had already been drawn. Given that I had what seemed like all the free time in the world, I offered my services on an urban crime comic called Soldier of God. What I thought would take a day at most to a couple weeks, as I went through each page, pointing out bad spelling, and later, with permission, adding my own text to expand or clarify the narrative. 45 grueling pages later, I had one draft, and a second draft ready for Ron, who is the artist, who did photo comic art made by modifying existing photos. He was so pleased with my work, he offered to do another comic based on my ideas, with his preference for gangsta stories. I would proceed to do Respect for JoJo, an expansion of one of his existing stories. My work with Ron presented a perfect relationship, or rather a perfect motivation on the part of the artist. Ron, for one, had final say on everything we did, and we'd often suggest genres or ideas we'd work with. He also often edited the stories as I wrote them, sometimes to my displeasure, and most importantly, we kept in constant contact via email. After doing around 15 shorter comics with Ron, I decided I wanted to work with a more traditional style of comic rather than photo comics. With the idea of a motivated artist in mind, I searched for new artists to work with. I advanced upon the artist-writer forums again, this time expanding into using multiple forum sites. This trick helped me widen the pool of who would respond, and early on this helped tremendously. At around this time, I had started having serious trouble finding artists. I would realize later that I had been tremendously lucky to get the work I did at the artists I had. Even if that work didn't end up anywhere, it wasn't exactly what I liked. Looking at other artists looking for art, looking at other writers looking for artists, they would post again and again, getting no response. Therefore, I would have to somewhat distinguish myself from the crowd, or otherwise appeal more amicable to than the majority. Over the course of time, I developed such a posting style. Rather than simply suggest one comic, I would often suggest 3 comic ideas I would have at the time, with the purpose of the comics having varying genres and mood, one dramatic and one silly and cartoonish. The style worked out very well, since this style would do 2 things: provide artists with variety from which to choose a concept, and also, through my detailed descriptions and multiple of that, a very good sense of the stories I like to create as a writer. I would have comics based on my own stories at this time, but also comics based on an artist's own vision that I would adapt and expand on, just like with Ron. However, new words came into my vocabulary that I didn't understand at first. You see, there's another reason why webcomics are created by one person. That person, of course, usually has tremendous motivation, but also an art style that is usually not in the accepted mainstream, or at least was the case of which when I started looking for new artists in 2010, when only a handful of comics actually made their creators money. Thus, not only did webcomics cater to amateurs, but it also became clear that this webcomics world is not a world most artists sincerely want to break into because, of course, it didn't make money. I learned then that the term project pitch, which is an artist would usually do a short comic at the beginning and then request to conform to industry guidelines to create cover letters, story summaries, and other materials to send a comic art to be bought. This was essentially a project pitch. This resulted in artists refusing to draw any more art for a project at a certain point, even if that comic was even their own property. So several years after I started, in the summer 2013, I started to improve. From that point, I developed relationships with artists for the first time, and the earliest and most lasting friendship I made was with French artist Gregory Floch, an artist trained in fine art and applying that skill to his comics. I remember first meeting with him upon making what had started to become my standard, posting multiple comic ideas of various styles. He looked them over and wrote back to me stating, "What other ideas do you have?" In addition to the 3 or 4 ideas, I added 3 or 4 more, incorporating the somewhat macabre and artsy style he employed. He chose what he felt to be the most unique idea, a comic about a female cat burglar slash hacker and a ghost head companion who could possess people. The comic was called Hacking Human, and while it never got any attention of publishers because it was considered too strange, the comic was such a big hit. The artist, not only did he do a preliminary chapter, but 2 others while even redoing chapters and coloring them to try and get the art comic looking more appealing to publishers. Working on the comic got me what I was looking for, another perfect collaboration. Before, a perfect collaboration relied on me doing what the artist wanted a lot, as with Ron, but this time was able to define what a relationship between artist and writer could be. Gregory Floch, henceforth referred to Floch as is his nickname, and I would email and, as was new to me, Skype. We exchanged ideas, show each other work as we were doing it independently of each other, and most notably, simply chat about love, life, and various other vegetables. As shown in the transcript, things can get pretty lewd due to Floch's sense of humor. Unlike with Ron, with whom I had a more professional relationship, Flock, with Flock, the relationship became more personal. I ended up writing many more scripts of Flock, and we still collaborate to this day. I sat down with him and asked him, when he met me, what he saw in my post. Please note that I will be paraphrasing what Gregory Flock is saying, since his mastery of English is not entirely readable from the Skype conversation I had with him. When I asked Flock, was there a way that I presented which drew you to me, Flock replied, I can't really remember, but I can from your post note that you wrote well, and I much prefer responding to someone like that. This response was echoed across many of the artists I worked with, that the difference between my post and others was that I'd written professionally. Also, as Flock says, some write a post that's too small, simply saying, I'm a writer needing an artist, but there's lack of information. More detail is better. But perhaps my style of communication that resonated the most with Flock was my own open-mindedness. One point I quickly found out about you is that you were not searching for a specific art style. Therefore, it was easier to do what I wanted. That was my breakthrough. From that point on, I started getting artists with a variety of styles, and finally, I was finishing projects that, although they didn't get sold, they were finished pieces of 8 pages or more, or even multiple chapters in the case of Gregory Flock. There was something more to it. I was networking. Updating my Windows Messenger to Skype, I could talk to artists from all over the world. And to this date, I often have conversations with countries as far-flung as Australia or Germany. I found if I form a relationship with an artist that's personal, that working with him or her is much easier and profitable than a simple working relationship. Eventually, through having completed works, I was able to form a portfolio, and over this past summer, the summer 2015, I was able to use my portfolio to obtain 2 positions as writer for a couple of companies looking to expand to the comic field. I was paid a sizable chunk of change overall, and using a similar portfolio, was able to recruit other artists to do project pitches that I hope to send off to publishers when the packages are completed. Is there more to learn? Certainly. Over the past year, I've been attracting more and more professional artists to the point that artists who request to work with me often have publication credits. There are still tactics I can learn to make my posts online more palatable, but more importantly, learn more skills to keep artists motivated and involved in the project. For now, I'm looking forward to, once I am done a few personal projects, getting more stuff published and making comics at least a part-time job for now. And all that is thanks to literary skill geared not only towards web forums online, but communicating over the internet with members of my chosen field in general.